This is on introduction of cognitive psychology. So, cognitive psychology is the scientific study of the mind that deals with how information is processed in human mind. It is concerned with the way we take in the information from the outside world and how we make sense of that information. It is that study of the mental processes like perceiving, remembering, reasoning, and this cognitive processes is important because these are the processes which are responsible for the way we act or react in the environment. Now, the different models of cognitive psychology, it tries to explain how the information is received and processed in human brain and how the various functions are executed. Now, the cognitive psychology is basically divided, or the model states like three different models of human experimental psychology, computer analogies and information processing approach, and the third approach is the cognitive neuroscience. Now, this human experimental psychology, it basically deals with the memory, attention, problem solving, language, this part of cognitive psychology. And computer analogies and information processing approach, it deals with the artificial intelligence and computer simulation. And the last one, the cognitive neuroscience, it basically tells us about the effect of the brain damage, uh, that is the effect of any brain damage on the various cognitive functions or activities. Now, here the question that arises is why this branch emerged? Because primarily it was whenever any behavior was studied, it was studied in the light of SR bond, or it was explained from the standpoint of innate drives and unconscious. But it uh, it came into view that this was not actually sufficient to explain all the actions, and from there, this branch from this from this emptiness of knowledge, from this dearth of knowledge of what are the things that we are missing, this branch of cognitive psychology emerged. Now, this the cognitive psychologists, they did not altogether reject the stimulus response bond of behaviorism, but they tried to answer how the stimulus is processed so that it gives various responses to the same stimulus, and it also paid attention to the mediational on the intermediate processes. Now, what are the mediational or the interpreted or the intermediate processes? Now, this is basically what is happening in between the stimulus and response. That is, what is exactly happening in that bond. We are say when we are saying SR bond. Now, how this bond is being formed? What is happening in that in between this coming of stimulus and emission of the response is what they paid attention to. This also helped in comparing the human brain with the computer operations. And with the advent of the cognitive psychology, we had better experimental methods and designed laboratories. Now, we'll move on to the different domains of the cognitive neuroscience. The cognitive psychology, it derives its theories from the 12 areas of research, that is the different 12 areas of research of cognitive psychology from which the theories of cognitive psychology actually emerges. Now, these 12 areas are obviously number one will be the human and the artificial intelligence. Then there is cognitive neuroscience, perception, thinking and concept formation, attention, developmental psychology, representation of knowledge, consciousness, memory, imagery, language. So we have actually 12 areas of research. Now, if we go on in to see how these areas actually contribute to cognitive psychology. Now, to start with the cognitive neuroscience, it is basically providing answers of answers to the SR bonds in the light of the neural impulses. That is what neurochemical changes takes place when the stimulus arrives for further processing. So here, the cognitive neuroscience, they are saying the they are actually explaining the SR bond in the way of the neurochemical changes or the neural impulses that is taking place in human body as a stimulus come, as it triggers an individual. Now next is perception. So to have an we all know what is perception. It's like a sensation, it's a meaningful sensation. Whenever we are comprehending a meaning to a sensation, where it's a then we can say it's perception. So to have an understanding about the interpretation of the sensory signals, a fair knowledge of the related concepts are required. Now what are these related concepts? And the related concepts for these obviously will be, firstly, that is the pattern recognition. Now what is pattern recognition? It's how a sensation is assigned specific meanings by organizing or categorizing the informations in the line of the specific patterns. Like we have some patterns in us, and accordingly we actually have a comparing or contrasting with the available patterns, and by this we actually comprehend the meaning of the stimulus that triggers us. Next, if we go on for the attention, now attention plays a very important role in functioning of many other cognitive functions like memory or perception. Actually all these are very related concepts. You cannot actually know any of the concepts in isolation, they are intertwined. So we generally get for the attention, see, we generally get flooded with many of the stimuli at the same time. Now attention plays the role of picking up the important ones for us, so that it could be processed further. That is, whenever we are bombarded with various stimuli in the various sensory registers, attention plays the role of being choosy or picky to pick up the important ones, the ones that we attend to, that seems to be important to us, or in some way it's uh, essential or in line of our need. So we focus on those stimuli, ignoring the others, and in this way we get to process the ones that is mostly needed by us at that point of time. Now then, it's when we are talking about attention in this way, then there obviously the next related concept will be having the consciousness. Now this is, being conscious is like being aware of exactly what is to be taken for further processing. That is selectively choosing the wanted information amidst the many other incoming informations. That is, I am very skillfully and selectively picking up exactly what is wanted, and I am filtering the residue. Next will be memory. Obviously, we all know this is a cognitive activity of brain that that's chief focus is on the storage and the retrieval of information. That is, till now the all this thing what we have said is like the information is coming and how this is picked up and taken for comprehension. Now then for the memory, it is like storage of that comprehended information, that whatever informations I have with me, I'll store it. So memory is like a storage function. Next will be the representation of the knowledge. Now see, this is also in relation to memory. Storing will be of no use if it cannot be properly represented. Therefore, if I'm storing the thing and it does not have any representation, that stored knowledge is of no use. So this is basically the conceptual clarity on anything. When you have that conceptual clarity, you can represent uh, your stored informations, your stored concepts in the apt situation. And see, for this conceptual clarity, we have to depend on imagery and language. That is also, uh, these two are also important domains of cognitive psychology. Now, what is imagery? Imagery is basically a pictorial imprint of a concept. This can be called as a seen as viewed as a cognitive map that is unique to every individual. That is, it is a concept, it is an abstract idea of the things that we know, or of the informations that we have. So that idea, the abstract idea, the cognitive map, the imprint that we have in our brain is our imagery. And the next is language. So obviously we all know language is important for self expression, but it is equally important for comprehension of information. For proper processing of information, the correct comprehension of the language in which the information is given to you is required. So language obviously forms a very important basis of information processing approach, or the cognitive psychology. Now, then there is developmental psychology. Now, the developmental psychology, it basically covers the span of development from birth to death through maturation, and how cognition or how cognitive abilities change with the development is the main focus over here. Now, we are coming to the thinking and the concept formation thing. Now, for proper concepts to be formed, as we are thinking about the informations and how that have a cognitive map and like that, for properly analyzing the informations or development of concepts, analyzing and synthesizing of the incoming data is required. And this mindful analyzing technique is basically thinking. That is, whenever an information is coming, it is not, it's like coming and it's just put in somewhere. It is not like that. We always have an active mental process acting on that information, or cooking something different from that by comparing or contrasting with our experiences, or that imagery using the imagery or the pattern recognition thing that we have. And this thing, this analyzing synthesis of the data that is coming to the brain, that is coming to the individual, is the process of thinking, and this is very important for the formation of concepts. Lastly, obviously, we'll be talking about the human and the artificial intelligence. Now, this has already been explained as understanding the human brain functions in relation to the computer functions. That is, we are trying to explain the human brain as or in the light of the computer system. Like, now, why it can, you can ask why is that so it's because computer or the artificial intelligence, the way it works, it is basically replication of how the human brain works. So that is why it's called artificial intelligence, as we have the regional one, so this was the artificial one. So as the artificial intelligence is devised, this it's explained in the same way we try to explain the human intelligence also. So these are the domains of psychology, the cognitive psychology. Now, the information processing approach, it obviously has the major portion of importance in cognitive psychology. So, see, the cognitive approach, it uh, gained its popularity in the late 1950s and the early 1960s through the work of Piaget and Tolman. But it was that the arrival of the computers that gave cognitive psychology the terminology and the metaphors which was needed to investigate the human mind. Cognitive psychologists tried to understand the complexities of human cognition by comparing it with artificial system of computer. As the computer functions, the human mind also handles informations. Essentially, computer codes the information. That is, it takes the information in its own language, that is the binary language. And then it stores the information, uses the information, and produces an output or retrieves the information in the same way. Now, see, in this way, only the brain also functions, because it takes the information not in any language but in the way of neural inputs. that we said in cognitive neuroscience. So it actually codes in its own language. So the brain has its own language, and it codes the information or understands and comprehends it in its own language, and then it gets stored for future references or use whenever the response is needed, or for any response the same thing is decoded in our language and it's given out. So the computer acts in the same way as the human brain does. Now, the idea of information processing was adopted by cognitive psychologists as a model of how human mind works. And for this is based on certain assumptions. The assumptions are like, number one, information made available from the environment is processed by a series of processing systems. Now, the series of processing systems, this includes attention, perception, memory, and secondly, these processing systems transform or alter the information in systematic ways. Thirdly, the aim of research is to specify the processes and structures that underlie the cognitive performance. And fourthly, the information processing in humans resembles that in computers. Now, when we are talking about cognitive processing, we must say it's basically based on the schema, that is, a mental framework of belief and expectations developed from experience. Now, what is this schema? A schema is basically a cognitive framework, a cliche that helps to organize and interpret the informations based on our experiences. Therefore, schema can be viewed as a mold. Exactly the way how the mold is used to give a shape to something. So if we put something in that mold, that so that that thing the thing that I've put in mold gets the shape of the mold. So mental framework, or the schema, it actually serves as a reference point or for the new informations, to so that the new informations can be tallied with or compared with the schema, and if it's fit in the schema, and accordingly we interpret the information based on that mold, and that mold is basically, it comes from our experiences, and so this schema is obviously unique to every individual. As the information processing starts with the reception of stimuli or the information and ends in the production of a response, it's based on the and this production of response is basically based on individual schema, but it obviously cannot overlook the intermediate processes that acts in between the stimulus and the response. That means how that schema is used to offer meaning to the information is the main focus of cognitive psychologists. This mental event could be any cognitive function like memory, perception, attention, reasoning, or problem solving, etc. These are known as the mediational processes because they mediate, that is, they go in between the stimulus and the response. They come after the stimulus and before the response. Therefore, the cognitive psychologists say if somebody wants to understand the behavior, he has to understand these mediational processes. And understanding of these mediational processes, this becomes the focus point of the cognitive psychology. Now we will moving on to the methods of cognitive psychology. The methods of cognitive psychology, in the first place we have the experiments on the human behavior. So for this experiments on the human behavior, we have the more controlled experimental designs and more uh, designed laboratories. As we already said, with the advent of the cognitive psychologists, we got more designed labs. In that way, this experiments on the human behavior that are conducted in a typical laboratory setting with all experimental tools and control of the variables, obviously it is more structured and it follows more stringent rules. So the first method, that is the experiments on the human behavior, they follow more rules and are more methodically done. Now, the second method is for the psychobiological research. Now, as the name suggests, the psychobiological, it's basically the interplay of the cognitive functions and the biological makeup that is unique to the individual. Now, whenever I'm saying psychobiological, we have the psycho and the biological. So, for the psycho, this is the cognitive functions, that is psychological thing, that is the cognitive thing, how what I'm thinking and what is making this thing happen in my mind. And accordingly, I have with this, that is behavior is seen as a product of cognitive and the biological setup, that is how I am biologically, my chromosomal shapes and my chromosomal hereditary lineages that I have, that is obviously unique to individuals. This is viewed as the source of any phenomenon. How these two interplay, how the biological and the cognitive functions interplay, they are viewed, this bond is viewed as the source of any phenomenon. Now, third in the line is obviously self reports, case studies, and naturalistic observation. Now, for this, obviously, for the self reports, that is the account of the individual people that serves as a source of study. Then the case studies is obviously the same thing of the individual reports, the individual cases that we handle. If we get to see from that, it can be the narratives, or it can be an observation in the natural settings, that is observing the behavior of individuals in natural setting and surroundings. That can obviously be obviously a method of cognitive psychology. And the last one is the computer simulations and the artificial intelligence. This is basically the digital explanation of the cognition. Now, various models that has devised to say how the computer process the informations, and like various models, whatever models we have, that is based on how the computer is made to function. Now, in the same way as we have tried to explain the functions of the computer, in the same way, in the same light, we have also tried to explain the functioning of the human mind. So this approach, this type of method that is used in cognitive psychology, this is computer simulation and artificial intelligence. Now, with this unit of MPCL 1 is completed, and thank you for being with me. And if you have any doubts, you can obviously put your questions in the comment section. Thank you.